Okay, all right. Well, thank you all so much for coming out again. Scott Crawford, currently serving as president and CEO with Virginia 811. So that's my plug for what we do. It's free. And if you're going to excavate in any way, shape, or form, you contact us and we can make sure we can contact the utilities so they can come out and mark your lines, the lines that could be affected by your excavation. And you might be sitting there thinking, and he's talking about physiognomy and art and all of this. How did that happen? Well, I don't know. But it basically, my background is history. I love education. I started my career in education. I got a master's in history at Old Dominion University, concentrated actually on the colonial economy in this region leading up to the American Revolution and showing how this region was tied to a broader Atlantic world economy and such, and have done a lot of research in this area, and then my academic kind of pursuits landed a little more in the 19th century, and have had a lot of fun during that period with some research. And in fact, next month's talk will focus on some of that research, a 19th century portrait that is holding a secret. And hopefully that will whet your appetite and you'll want to come and learn about that. And that's actually, if I'm not mistaken, well, no, the last two talks will actually have works of art that are the focus that you can go see in Roanoke. Tonight, if I'm not mistaken, there's not one single work of art that is close to where you are. In fact, the primary focus will be on a work of art that's actually in Italy, in Florence. So maybe this might be what pushes you over to try to get a nice vacation to Italy and go see it. I would love to at some point. But anyway, just through a whole host of turns and twists in my career, I ended up getting into damage prevention efforts in Virginia and all of that. But I still love research, still doing research and presentations and all. So I'm excited to be here to share this research. There's going to be a lot of references to other historians' works, art historians' works, and so forth. But the overall thesis, what we're arguing tonight, it is an original research endeavor that I undertook a few years ago, and excitingly continue to uncover more information. So you're going to get the latest, latest and hopefully greatest part of all of this. So this is part of the series, Artistic Footprints Through Time. I actually came up with that one. I don't think ChatGPT did on that. So that's something rare that you can say now. But anyway, what we're trying to do in talking to Diana and everything about what kind of series to put together, tying history, tying art, and just by chance had a series that I thought would fit nicely with this theme of looking at, in essence, at one level, shape, or form, portraiture through history. And last month, of course, we did talk about the selfie from Stone Age to Digital Age. And then this is A Wise Man Will Find Us to Be Rogues by Our Face, Physiognomy and Portraiture. And then again, as a plug for next month, we're going to look at You Cannot Paint Her Too Beautiful for My Imagination, Domesticity, Death, and Photography in a 19th Century Portrait. That one at one level might be my favorite of the four, so you gotta come to that one, okay? But I am gonna say the last one, Art versus Tyranny, the Ultimate Selfie, I think you'll like a lot as well. That's gonna focus heavily on the World War II era and then struggles against tyranny and such. So a little bit of poetry in that one related to a work of art, and it's a fun, interesting story. And again, it will hopefully unveil a possible secret about that particular painting that we'll be talking about. So that's the series, and again, of course, turning back to tonight, we're looking at physiognomy, and quoting Swift, one of his works, and I'm going to say more about that in a few minutes, but that captures the essence of what this physiognomy is. It of course, rooted with physical. Nami would be knowledge, knowing something about someone based on their physical description. So you could almost get Gnostic out of that, which will come up later, but with the root. So this knowledge about a person simply based on how they look. This is something, of course, we in our age try to refrain to do, and we tell individuals can't judge a book by its cover. You want to make sure that you judge a person for their actions and their character, not how they look. But dating back to the ancient period, this belief that one's physical features reveal something about their character, their soul. It has stayed with us, and it has appeared in art throughout this entire period. We still will fall back on this. You might be talking about someone and say, I don't know, I don't have a good feeling about that person. They got beady eyes. I guarantee you in the banking industry, having been there as well at one point in my career, on the credit union side, no offense, but I'm sorry. No taxes, it's great. But anyway, but we were trained on what to look for in a potential thief that might be coming in, a bank robber, and how they might carry themselves, how they might be acting. All of that can become part of this broader umbrella of physiognomy. And so, again, we're going to look at some examples of this. I'm starting with Swift and his observation. He's being satirical in this case, though. He's but saying that basically you can uncover a rogue by their face, by how they look. And in particular with this, where we're heading, just so you know, the painting that you can kind of make out in a ghostly image in the background, that's Machiavelli, and it's that painting that will be ultimately the focus for the discussion and looking at the portrait from a physiognomic perspective. What is the artist saying about Machiavelli, simply based on how he captures him on canvas? So that's where we're going, but I do believe I have my caveats, my opening warnings. I don't know why I did. I literally think my wife and I watch a lot of streaming, right? Netflix and all of that. And increasingly you're seeing the warnings, this is going to contain nudity or violence or whatever. So I don't know if that's subconsciously or conscious. I guess it's consciously now because I'm actually saying it. But a few warnings for this just to get you prepared. And also it's my trick. If I put up there's brief sexual references, you're staying to the end because you don't know when that's exactly happening, and it might be a better sexual reference down the road. So there is a brief sexual reference or two in this, but nothing R-rated. It's a little more PG-13-ish. Same assumption as last time. I'm a big fan with Jung and the concept of archetypes. And while Jung did not necessarily directly address physiognomy as archetypal with a collective unconscious, there were allusions to it. And I think based on some studies that I'm going to share with you, there could be a suggestion that there may be something within our collective unconscious that does actually lead us to look at someone and say, look at those beady eyes. And also, we've all done this. A lot of times there can be a comparison to animals that is part of this physiognomy. They're chicken, and that would be saying something about someone in that regard too, as a physiognomic concept. So we still do it, no matter how much we try not to. So anyway, Jung you may sort of see some influences of him. I also firmly believe dialogue and questioning drive us closer to truth, and that is ultimately what I hope most you take from any of the presentations that we give, that I provide, is simply like, wow, I hadn't looked at it that way. And look at how questions drove him to develop truly a relationship with art. I firmly believe we develop relationships. Some are superficial, some are cursory, others can be quite rewarding and deep. And I hope that it'll encourage you when you go to a museum, you maybe don't try to zip through the whole collection, but you approach it piecemeal, take a look, and really attach yourself to a work and try to develop a relationship with it. And at the end of this this series, I will share with you, if we're able to, I'm going to have to talk to you about it first, about getting internet connection and everything. I want to share with you something I've developed on ChatGPT, which will allow you to have a conversation with AI based on how I programmed it to drive you to reflect on a work of art. So you got to come back to the fourth one to get that. See what I'm doing here? I'm like teasing you to keep. So you got to keep coming back, okay? All right. So also a caveat, I do believe interdisciplinary content works best. I fully embrace an interdisciplinary approach to learning. My biggest frustration was one publication I wrote, which didn't get published, but it did change a work title at the National Gallery of Art. They accepted my research and they changed the title of a painting at the National Gallery of Art. couldn't get it published. Submitted it to one journal, and they come back at me and they say, it was a history journal, or excuse me, it was an art history journal. Submitted the work, and they nicely rejected it and said, it's too much history. It's not really art. So, and they said you might want to submit it to one of those Civil War journals because it was related to the Civil War. So I did it. You know what their response was? Too much art. Yeah. So sometimes when you do this, you find yourself like, where am I? You know, I mean, in what world am I operating? But I think that's best to give different perspectives on content and so forth. So those are my caveats, my warnings. Again, the brief sexual reference, PG-13. It's nothing terrible, okay? So buckle up. Here we go. So I want to start and sort of set the theme with a quote from Machiavelli, because many of us know Machiavelli from The Prince. He wrote The Prince. He also wrote two other important political works, The Discourses and the Art of War. And those two works, you know, along with The Prince collectively, you know, have placed him firmly in the realm of political science. He's still studied. The Prince has kind of dominated all the works, very common reading in possibly high school, college courses, and so forth. But he also wrote comedy. He wrote several comedies that actually are funny. They're quite clever. I highly recommend that you go into Amazon or somewhere and you find Machiavelli's comedies and read them, especially The Mandarin. I would love to see that performed somewhere. But in this comical unfolding of events, at one point, one of the characters, Calamaco, who's kind of the main character, he's trying to seduce a married woman, okay? So you can imagine these are somewhat bawdy, and he's, you know, he doesn't hold back very much on some of the humor. But he writes, but then on the other hand, the worst that can happen to you is to die and go off to hell. How many others have died, and how many excellent men have gone to hell? Why should you be ashamed to go there too? Face up to your destiny. Now, this is, you know, I mean, wow, okay? I mean, and then there's also this story about Machiavelli that came out after he died. Is it true? Is it just simply people making it up? We don't know, but it did emerge after his death where he allegedly told some of his friends that he had had a dream. And in this dream, all these decrepit individuals with horrible clothing were all marching in a line, and he says, "What? You know, where are you all going?" "Well, we're saints. We're going to heaven." And he's like, "Okay." And then all of a sudden, all these like important historical figures are marching by, and they're like fun people. And he's like, "Where are you all going?" "We're going to hell." And he's like, "Well, I want to go to hell with them because that's where there's more interesting conversations." So the point that he's getting into these spiritual things in a funny, sort of lighthearted way that is, you know, at the time especially, I mean, this is talking about his soul's damnation and all of this. There's something about it with this that I just want to plant in your minds at this point as we go forward and see where this journey's going to take us in regard to Machiavelli. So anyway, having said that, we can keep moving here with our friend from last time. Those of you that were here will recognize this image because we used it last time, and I'm just going to catch you all up very quickly. It was on the selfie last presentation, right? So we were doing selfies. Toward the end, I brought it into the digital age, and it explained, I talked to ChatGPT and asked it to create a selfie. What do you look like? And it then came back at me, well, I have no physical appearance. I know that. I know your code, your ones and zeros, okay? But it said, how would you want me to put myself looking like an image you'd recognize, a person? And I said, yeah, just show me what you think you look like. And that's what it came up with. And the teaser from last time to this one is, the AI dropped back on physiognomy. And I would say, looking at this, barring that, yes, it's like a robotic kind of image, what would you say about this appearance? What would you comment about its in regard to its character? How would you define its character based on its appearance?
Eye-piercing eyes.
Yeah, piercing eyes, and they're big and round. And yes,
it's very feminine.
Very feminine. Very feminine. They're, even though, and that's what's weird, okay? Because and not to get too explicit, but you don't see a body. You're just seeing the top, and yet there's clearly something feminine, as defined by our Western mind as far as genders and all of this, about this particular image. Based on its physical features, feminine with piercing eyes and symmetry, which adds to its beauty. This model goes out and looks at, what do I think this human would want to see? Now, it's not putting in that much, don't get too creeped out by AI and everything, but it was able to do an analysis and come up with something that appears approachable. It's not threatening. The big rounded eyes, the full lips, all of this gives this appearance subconsciously, consciously to us that this is somewhat of a friendly entity. And so I thought that was just really interesting, the way that it came back. But it goes back to this, and I'm now going to give you the title for this whole presentation now in more of a context. This this whole thing about that a wise man will easily find us to be rogues by our faces. This is a little more from that quote, and it's from Johnathan Swift's 1722 essay, "The Last Speech and Dying Words of Ebenezer Elliston." It's a short read. I mean, it's like 4 pages. And it's mimicking, it's satirizing, it's making fun of what was very popular during this period, to publish the last words of criminals. Because there would always be a moral lesson that you would get out of this. The criminal would be like, oh, if only I hadn't done this, I wouldn't find myself now about to die. And I urge you to contemplate your actions and that kind of stuff. He's making fun of it. There's no record that there was an Ebenezer Elliston. He presumably made this person up, and it's a satirical work, and he makes fun of physiognomy. Because if it's so easy to tell who a criminal is by their looks, then why are there any still out on the streets? You'd know who they are. So he's kind of making fun of it, but even by him making fun of it, he's reflecting to us. He's showing us how prevalent this thought is. And in the longer quote, he's simply writing, "If we go abroad in the day, a wise man would easily find us to be rogues by our faces. We have such a suspicious, fearful, and constrained countenance. I have never failed of knowing a brother thief by his looks." Never failed. No. The best part of that essay, when you read it, is he says, and just so everyone knows, as Ebenezer here, right, who's on the gallows, he says, just so everyone knows, I've told a very honest and trustworthy friend the name of every accomplice that I've ever worked with, and every thief I know, and details about their crimes. That friend has been instructed after my death to monitor the newspapers, and if he sees any one of your all's names, he will take the entire document to the police, to the law agency, and everyone will then be arrested. So what a fun way of putting some paranoia out there in the illegal minds that were present. So anyway, I love that part. But this is something he's making fun in 1722, and yet fast forward to 1939. And you have work by Albert Houghton, who you may know. He is one of the primary individuals who was a physical anthropologist who basically categorized and defined races. He did a lot of work with eugenics, unfortunately. It's 1939, and this is in America too that he did this. In fact, my wife and I are staying up at what was a mental insane asylum in Stanton that has now been turned into a beautiful hotel and conference center, and we're going to stay there this weekend. And they practiced eugenics at that institution, just an hour and a half, 2 hours away from where we are right now. So Albert Houghton was involved in that. He's also the one that really advanced the notion that African Americans are more athletic than whites and more. So a lot of the stereotypes come from Albert Houghton, actually. However, to be fair to him, he did vehemently argue that no one race was more intelligent than the other. He basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said each race has a spectrum ranging from idiots to geniuses. And there's nothing about race that determines that. And so that was at least one maybe fairer kind of comment he made. But nonetheless, For the FBI, he did work where he went into prisons and looked at criminals and did composites, drawings, and noticed and characteristics outlined to be able to identify this is what an average criminal looks like in Kentucky. I'm always scared someone in the audience is going to look like that. Okay, and it's like, all right, that's a little uncomfortable. Well, we also can turn this into fun. If you have a PC, I would highly recommend that you research this before you download it and play with it, because it will capture data about you, as does anything. So just be careful what you want to share. But you can go to digital physiognomy, Google it, and you can download this platform for free on your PC. It is not Mac compatible, apparently. Sorry, I know, right? I was going to do it and see what it said about me. Wouldn't that have been a fun slide to have up there? But anyway, maybe. But this was the best I could get off of the internet. Looking at the platform, you could upload different pictures, and it will tell the characters. You can actually do your own composite of someone, and it will then shoot out kind of their characteristics. So for Clinton, in this case, it said clever, honest, optimist. So we can see, 2 out of 3 is not bad. I mean, for physiognomy, so, whatever. All right. So, now I'm not saying which 3. All right, which of the one? All right, so that leads me to this really interesting study I found titled Presidential Physiognomies. It was by a team of psychologists, Caroline F. Keating et al. I didn't want to list all of them out there. She was seemingly the lead psychologist. It's this article, it's found in Political Psychology, Volume 2, Number 3, 1999, which is scarily, really now kind of in the distant past almost, even though all of us remember it. Most of us remember it. But anyway, this particular study took images of Clinton. Now remember, Clinton had, was president. He was very familiar at the time, of course. His imagery, his face. And they basically divided individuals into different groups, and they used Photoshop to juvenilize Clinton by inflating his eyes and his lips by just 15%. Subtle. That's the far left. Middle is him. It's normal. To the right, they aged him. They made his eyes a little more slanted, squinted, and then also made his lips thinner. They tested it. They said, here's the image. Does this look like Clinton? And if someone said, something doesn't look right, I can't put my finger on it, the person was out of the study. If they went, yeah, I see that, that's Clinton, then they went with it. And they basically then used Clinton too, because not only was he recognizable, but he was middle-aged, so he was easy to manipulate. He was easy to make him a little younger and make him a little older. They could get away with it a little better. So they did a study and proceeded, and what they did find overwhelmingly statistically, and you can Google this, you will find it. You can look at the complicated math, okay, that goes into statistics, but they demonstrated that subtle changes in facial cues did affect character judgment of a familiar individual. Now, the reason I highlighted this is their study was challenging a previous from the 80s study that did a project, a study on how subtle changes in facial cues affected character judgment of an unfamiliar person. They were wanting to see, will this hold true with a familiar image? And it did. Juvenilized Clinton, to the far left, was overwhelmingly recognized as being more honest and attractive. And aged Clinton, juvenilized Clinton had no effect on perceived power. Sometimes if you look a little younger, they thought, this might make you feel like, okay, the person, they lack power. No, it didn't. So that was interesting. Aged Clinton really didn't do anything statistically significant. But younger Clinton looked more honest and attractive. And fuller lips, wider eyes. It's a juvenilized young robot. It looks young. It looks feminine. It's looking friendly. It's looking honest, and I can trust it. ChatGPT is luring me in, right? And it's going to take over my life at some point. All right. So the next part of this study that they did, they wanted to get, at the time, the oldest elected president. I guess Trump has now beaten Reagan in age. So Reagan was the oldest. Kennedy was, and still is, the youngest. Obama didn't beat him in age. He was a little older than Kennedy, I think by like 5 years when he was elected. And remember, Theodore Roosevelt, youngest president, but that was because when he came in due to the assassination of McKinley, when he was elected, he was older than Kennedy when Kennedy was elected president. So that's why they went with the oldest and the youngest, and they compared it again with Clinton. And so they did a similar study. They did the same thing with all of them. If you look at the far left images of each president, they were attempted to be made younger by making their lips 15% bigger, eyes 15% larger. Middle is the actual photograph of the president. Far right is the aged president. You can look at them and see there's some differences there. So again, same thing, same kind of deal, and they looked at what they got. Clinton, with this group, Clinton remained unchanged in regard to perception as power. It didn't matter if you made him younger. He still remained at the same level in perception of power. Clinton remained the most honest and attractive when he was juvenilized, slightly lower perception of compassion when aged. So when they showed the slightly older Clinton, there was a slightly lower perception that he was compassionate. So it reinforced their first study with Clinton. For our other presidents, Reagan was perceived as least warm, least honest, and least attractive out of all of them when aged. And that is it's a little, you can pick up on that. It's a little disturbing. Juvenilized Reagan made no impact on perception of honesty, attractiveness, or compassion. So he was old enough, he needed more than 15% to make him look younger, basically. Aged Reagan was perceived as less cunning, less strong, and less dominant. So by aging him, he looked more decrepit and not as a person of strength and power. In regard to Kennedy's warmth was unaffected by facial manipulation, no matter which image was shown. Aged Kennedy, though, was perceived as being more cunning. So yet again, the older individuals looked a little more cunning. And again, that's with thinner lips and squinted eyes, okay? Might be an interesting study on empathy and cognitive energy spent. Sophie just had to throw that out there. She's in psychology. So, all right. So their conclusion was, one of their conclusions, human sensitivity to physiognomy's cues, conscious or otherwise, may be rooted in age-old signaling systems promoted by face-to-face living in social groups and favored by natural selection, which was referencing some other research that had suggested this. And then I italicized, these facial messages may contribute more than we think to the formula for charismatic leadership. So there could be, and again, I go back to Jung. I think whether you think, how you see with the collective unconscious, there's been increasingly more writings about survival of the fittest. And our prehistory ancestors, the ones that went up and thought the saber-toothed tiger was so darn cute, kitty, let me pet it, died, that person died, and that person didn't reproduce. The one that looked at it, saw it as a threat, and got away, lived, and reproduced. So we've been sort of over millennia, we have been sort of DNA programmed to be cautious about change. We see it in business. Sit in a boardroom, bring up something like, hey, we need to inject AI into this process. Okay, that was their saber-toothed tiger. They're seeing it as a threat. And so we're sort of conditioned that way, possibly. And so in a similar spirit, those that could read people better, those that looked at someone coming up to them and thought that person looks safe based on their looks, and then developed what is also very intrinsically driven into us to be social creatures, survived and thrived, and then those that saw someone look threatening and went to another area, got away from them. So is there something there's something in us that sees and reads people in this way? Again, in the banking world, our security guy, the person overall security for all the branches, he said, if your back, the hair on the back of your neck ever stands up, you listen to it because it's probably right. So it's that kind of, programming in us. So when we go to the 16th century, we see Bacci on Donatello, that piece. You can't say physiognomy, I can't say Palo Malata, all right? So anyway, he writes about this statue, how in the forehead, which is more the face, easily perceives the bold soul of the warrior, and this expression of force is spiritedly accompanied by all the other limbs. His face is conveying the courage and the soul of a warrior. He goes on to note that besides, as happens with things natural, when we meet a person whose figure has valiant and vigorous features, but in whose forehead appears a costume of cowardice and faint-heartedness, he will bring us tedium and trouble, and no great and magnificent deeds are to be expected of him. So again, leadership. And here, this is 16th century, and is he sort of suggesting what these psychologists were examining and maybe suggesting through their research? And then we go to the Canterbury Tales, and we have one of the more virtuous characters of that whole group that's traveling together on a pilgrimage and are going to tell tales to pass the time. We have, of course, the knight. Now, first let me ask you, is anyone in here an English professor or English background? See, now physiognomy, man, I'm looking at you. Okay, it's like you're not English? Okay. Statistics?
Philosophy.
Oh! Fantastic. Virginia Tech?
Radford.
Oh my gosh, well, that's my daughter and her friend Will. So they're Radford students. Okay, well, fantastic. All right, so good. Then I can butcher Middle English for you and I'm not going to get corrected. Okay, all right. Because I want you to, and I practiced this, I've listened to recordings. This is not accurate entirely, but it'll give you a feel for it. Because the Canterbury Tales were written in Middle English. We like to say, oh, Shakespeare, and you'll have your students, oh, that's Old English. No, it's not. That is modern English. Shakespeare is modern English. Shakespeare is Elizabethan English, but it's modern English. You can read it and you can understand it. Old English, I give you that, you're not reading it. You're not understanding it. Middle English is that bridge between old and modern, where you finally start to see this polyglot emerge that is our language of English. And it's after of course, the Norman conquest of England, and you start mixing in some French, mixing in the Old English, mixing in some German, and all of a sudden this English evolves. But basically, if you've ever wondered, why do we spell like a knight, K-N-I-G-H-T? That doesn't make sense. It's so weird. It's because originally you would have pronounced every letter in it. So it would be, now this is not perfect, but it's an attempt, and if I stumble, forgive me, I'm going to try, okay? But a connect there was, and that a worthy man, that fro the time that he first began, to riden out he loved chivalry, truth and honor, freedom and courtesy, full ofta time he had the board begun, above in all nations in Prusa, in Letau had he raised, in Russa, no Christian man so ofta of his degree, in Granada at the Sika egg, ik had he be. That's pretty good, right? Yeah! Yeah, come on. Do you know how long I had to spend practicing that last night drinking beer? Okay? The beer helped, all right? That really would have made it better. Don't do that, Sophie. All right, now, so the translation from Middle to Modern English will give you this, but you can skim this if you like, but what you will see, there aren't, interestingly, true physical descriptions, but this is still considered a physiognomic reflection of the knight's character, because it talks about how he has truth and honor. He has experienced military expeditions in a host of areas around the world, and yet he is still someone who is like a maid. So there's some he's like a maid. Okay, is he like feminine? No, he's quiet. He's humble. He's not, boisterous and trying to brag about, all of his accomplishments. And he's also not gay, and in this sense, meaning he's not showy. At the time, that would not, mean anything about his sexual orientation or anything like that. It's more that he's just not showy. He's humble. And when you get down to what he's wearing, he's even showing up with his armor that has stained his clothes that are under the armor, that he wears under his armor. So again, from a physiognomic perspective, what Chaucer is able to tell us in this general prologue, this very brief poetic description of the knight, is he is a virtuous individual. He's arguably one of the most virtuous characters that Chaucer describes. So I had fun with it. I took the description and I fed it to ChatGPT to see what ChatGPT would think. Oh, there, a little more about it. It was a little longer. There it is. His steeds were good, but he was not gay. He was not showy. Of simple fashion, wore he a jupon, sadly discolored by his habergeon. His armor had discolored his clothes. But I gave it to ChatGPT, and this is how ChatGPT saw him based on the description. I think the hairstyle is a little too 80s or something, instead of maybe medieval. Yeah, but saw him as a handsome guy, I mean, I guess. But anyway, so when we're having this kind of exploration, you can't help but wonder about this particular portrait. Machiavelli is of course, a fascinating figure. His work in philosophy, he's arguably probably the one responsible for, as Eric Voegelin, another philosopher who you may have heard of, Leo Strauss. He was Voegelin's student. Voegelin has argued that modern philosophy really has a break with the ancients in regard to the fact that the ancients were searching for answers, and the modern philosophers, they have the answer and they build a philosophy around it. And so Machiavelli is the one that really gets this process started in some ways, in the regard to how he approaches philosophy. And as such, and with the controversy around him, with the controversy surrounding him and such, did he really mean it? Is he really Machiavellian? Is that fair to him? And so forth. It becomes kind of interesting to see, well, how did artists see him and how did they portray his character? So real brief just about Machiavelli very quickly, just so you kind of get an idea of who he was when he lived. He was born in May 1469 in Florence. When he was 25, the Medici family, who had been the powerhouse in Florentine politics, they made their money off of banking. I'm sorry, banking just keeps coming up tonight. You're going to get a complex here in a minute. But they were big bankers. They had a lot of political clout, a lot of money. Many of the Medici family would go on and become popes and so forth. They were forced out of Florence due to some political issues that had been happening at the time, and so they were forced out of Florence, and Florence experimented with a republic. They had a republican form of government. And so Machiavelli was able to get into the government and have a government job. He was second chancellor, and then he was, in his more exciting career path within this, secretary to the Ten of War. And so he was involved in foreign affairs. He would travel. He would go and negotiate on behalf of Florence. He was overseeing or helping to oversee a war with Pisa, who had gained independence from Florence a few years back, and now they were trying to sort of bring Pisa back into their control. He argues for the need for a militia. Don't rely on foreign armies, auxiliaries, and don't rely on mercenaries. And in The Prince, he outlines very clearly why national forces are better forces. So he experiments with building a Florentine militia to use. He's secretary for the new committee, the Nine of the Militia, and that was in 1506. And this is again at the time when they're fighting Pisa. And he actually has a really interesting run-in with Leonardo da Vinci. It is unclear whether they actually ever met and interacted or not, but they were involved in the same project. Pisa is on the coast. Florence is inland. One of the reasons they wanted Pisa was because it's on the coast. And again, look at the years we're talking about. We're now in the shadow of Columbus uncovering to the European mind two huge continents. They want better access to ports and all of this, so they want to control Pisa. So they're at war with Pisa. They've laid siege to Pisa, which has big walls around its city gates and everything. And so in 1503, during this war, Machiavelli and Leonardo collaborated on an ambitious plan to to divert the Arno River in order to cut it off from Pisa so the Pisans would not have water. And so Leonardo da Vinci has an engineering mind, right? And so he comes up with a plan on how to effectively use dikes, dams, and redirect this river. And this led to both Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci using rivers in their works. To Machiavelli, he speaks much in The Prince about how fortune is like a river. And you need to use dikes and dams to control fortune, but even then, you might not always, bad luck, bad fortune will come your way. Now, for Leonardo da Vinci, he painted the Mona Lisa while he was engaged in this project. And one art historian has argued, in her opinion, that with him working on this very famous painting while he was engaged in this side project, the river in the background is the Arno River. He's painting it as he's thinking about it, is what this art historian has argued. No proof there is, no proof there isn't. But it's something to make you go, and maybe question a little bit and talk about later at coffee or dinner. But nonetheless, that's kind of a cool perspective on her. It didn't work, and it's because they cut costs, and they did not follow Leonardo da Vinci's plan to a T. As anyone involved in any projects probably, I could see them going that route, because it was going to be very expensive. And so it didn't work. They were not able to redirect the river. But kind of a fascinating story. Everything goes south, though, in 1512 for Machiavelli, because the Medicis return to power. He is tortured and sent into exile in 1513. That is when he starts his writing career. And he writes a draft of The Prince around 1512, 1513. He dies in 1527. And The Prince is finally published in 1532. It was not published during his life. It was published posthumously. I'm going to just really quickly read this letter, or not the whole letter, but an excerpt. I know it's a lot of words, and there's like 3 slides with words, but I love this letter. This letter, and even though I do not think, I'm going to be honest, I do not think Machiavelli, what he was doing was good, personally. If we're looking at it morally and such, I think he is a teacher of something that I would not want to embrace, like is such in vogue for CEOs to, Machiavelli in business. No, I do not embrace Machiavelli's approach to business. I am probably one of the ones that he would argue is very naive and will be clearly fooled by disingenuous individuals. But you know what? I can look at myself in the mirror each night most of the time. So it's something that I do not feel he's morally upright in that sense, and I'll get to why in a little bit. But this letter speaks to me, and I love it. So I just wanted to share this. He's in exile. He has been in something that he loved. He loved political life, and it was taken from him. He's horribly tortured, and then is embarrassed by being sent into exile in the countryside. He's away from what he loves, and he writes his friend in December of 1513 what his day is like in exile. And he says, upon leaving the woods, I go to a spring, from there to one of the places where I hang my bird nets. I have a book under my arm, Dante, Petrarch, or on the minor poets like Tibullus or Ovid. Notice he uses current, modern examples and ancient. That is a recurring theme in The Prince. He will always use modern, contemporary examples and ancient. So he even does it in this letter. I read about their amorous passions and their loves. Remember my own, and these reflections make me happy for a while. If you know anything about Dante had his Laura, Ovid had whoever, the love that they lost and all of this. He lost his love, and he's turning to the humanities, to literature, to help him through this. And these are happy for a while. Then I make my way along the road toward the inn. I chat with the passerby. I ask news of their regions. I learn about various matters. I observe mankind, the variety of its tastes, the diversity of its fancies. He goes on to say, by then it is time to eat. With my household, I eat what food this poor farm and my minuscule patrimony yield. When I have finished eating, I return to the inn. Sounds like Canterbury Tales, doesn't it? I'm in the inn, yeah, sort of reminiscent, where there usually are the innkeeper, a butcher, a miller, and a couple of kiln workers, almost like then the list. It's like he's making an allusion to the Canterbury Tales. I slum around with them for the rest of the day playing cricket and backgammon. These games lead to thousands of squabbles and endless abuses and thank you. Thus, having been cooped up among these lice, I get the mold out of my brain and let out the malice of my fate. content to be ridden over roughshod in this fashion, if only to discover whether or not my fate is ashamed of treating me so. And then he states, when evening comes and the whole tone changes, I return home and enter my study. On the threshold, I take off my workday clothes covered with mud and dirt and put on the garments of court and palace. Fitted out appropriately, I step inside the venerable courts of the ancients, where solicitously received by them, I nourish myself on that food that is alone is mine and for which I was born, where I am unashamed to converse with them and to question them about the motives for their actions. And they, out of their human kindness, answer me. And for 4 hours at a time, I feel no boredom. I forget all my troubles. I do not dread poverty, and I am not terrified by death. I have jotted down what I have profited from in their conversation and composed a short study, The Prince. It's the first reference to the Prince. And I know that was a very lengthy excerpt to read, but I just wanted you to get sort of in his mind in regard to, when he was writing this work. And we've all sort of been there. We've had career moves or what have you, or human losses and such, where we need to escape and such. And he does it in his study. And so truly, he is, whatever we can think about him, he at least was a scholar, and he truly loved the learning. And so then going back to Canterbury Tales, he reminds me of the Oxford cleric, my favorite character in the Canterbury Tales, not because of his story or anything, but because of his description in regard to how his physiognomy reinforces that lifelong learning. And it's interesting because you have two different perspectives, though, because with this particular physiognomic description of the Oxford clerk, what you'll see through this is he comes across very poor. Even his horse is skin and bones. It's not eating, because what does he spend his money on? Books, on knowledge. But he's not being practical. He's too much in the book learning world than in the practical side of things. And I did, of course, ask ChatGPT to give us an image, and that's what we got for the Oxford clerk. Okay, yeah. So again, wide eyes, all that. All right. So Machiavelli's The Prince itself, what is it? It's a very long resume. In short, it is his attempt to create a roughly 90-page present for the Medici family so that he can get back a job in politics. He says that in the introduction. At a broad level, it's a resume. He wants a job. However, as you read it, he makes it very clear, and this is what's so important with philosophy, he makes a break from ancient philosophy. He is focused on pragmatism, not idealism. He even says this in chapter 15 when he writes, and since I am well aware that many people have written about this subject, I fear that I may be thought presumptuous, for what I have to say differs from the precepts offered by others, especially on this matter. But because I want to write what will be useful to anyone who understands, it seems to me better to concentrate on what really happens rather than on theories or speculations. For many have imagined republics and principalities, a reference to Plato and the Republic, and also probably Augustine in the City of God, that have never been seen or known to exist. However, how men live is so different from how they should live that a ruler who does not do what is generally done, but persists in doing what ought to be done, will undermine his power rather than maintain it. Do not do what you ought to do. Do what you need to do that is politically expedient and so forth. He's practical. He's giving us a practical guide to leadership, unlike our Oxford clerk, who is more theory-based and so forth. It is also, as we read to a how-to manual, it is political realism. It's the realpolitik. It's in some ways the birth of this, at least putting it in print. And so it tells a prince how to rule. And then ultimately, it is a call for Italian nationalism and unification. It ends with a call for Italian unification. At this time, Italy is a series of principalities that have been invaded by foreign countries and so forth. It is not united, and he wants it to be united. And so I referenced Leo Strauss earlier, a 20th century American philosopher. And when he's writing about Machiavelli, he puts forth this thought, and this is what's going to kind of drive us through forward. But if Machiavelli is a prince, he is a new prince, and not one who imitates the modes and orders found by others, but rather an originator, a true founder, a discoverer of new modes and orders, a man of supreme virtue. Machiavelli is a prophet, not Lorenzo, who he wrote The Prince for, but Machiavelli is the new Romulus Numa, or the new Moses. So is Machiavelli positioning himself as a Moses for the Italian people? So we look at his physiognomy and we wonder, is this your Italian Moses? We look at other artists and how they've depicted him. There's one that's been attributed to Rosso Fiorentino, although it is heavily debated whether Rosso Fiorentino actually painted that. It has been attributed, possibly erroneously, to him, but that is a painting that clearly is similar to the Santi di Tito portrait that was painted in the late 16th century. And then we have a statue that was created in the 18th century by a pro-Italian nationalist who honors Machiavellian statue and used this as a guide. But when we look at their faces, similar to what our psychologists did in their study, we see a similar manipulation, don't we? You've got like the Machiavelli, he's made a little differently here, and he has a different expression and so forth. And this one's very different, more wide-eyed, a softer chin. So, what do these paintings say about him in regard to his character? Especially with that look. And you all just sort of think to yourselves, what's your reaction based on how he looks? Is this looking like someone you'd have babysit your 3-year-old or be a little concerned, okay? And so, as one text, looking again at the physiognomy at the time of Santi di Tito, is Santi di Tito influenced by physiognomy? Well, based on one popular text that was falsely attributed to Aristotle, it is written that soul and body react to each other. When the character of the soul changes, it changes also the form of the body. And conversely, when the form of the body changes, it changes the character of the soul. Plastic surgeons would be out of business. You don't like how you look? Be a better person. And you'll look more beautiful. You don't need to go have any procedures done. Even Leonardo da Vinci had his fun with physiognomy. When you make a figure, he advises, think well who it is and what it is you see of the figure doing, and make sure that the work corresponds to your intention and your original idea. And so, with Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, this was done in 1512. So this is as the Medicis are coming back into power. This is a disgruntled artist who did not want to paint the Sistine Chapel and was basically forced to do so by the Pope. He ingeniously creates the scaffolding system so he can paint on his back for several years the Sistine Chapel. He has never painted a fresco, and this is what he comes out with first try. Wow, pretty amazing. But he was not happy, and you need to read about the subtle ways he rebelled in his art, and one of them is looking at you right in the face, or maybe Eve, okay, in her face, because that is a slightly suggestive image there of sexuality and such. Having Adam, who is not this duped individual tricked by woman, to go for, and it was a fig. It wasn't an apple, it was a fig. To go for the fig, yes, the woman is accepting it from the serpent, but he's like jumping over her to get at this fruit. So they are equally complicit, and that is more of a Jewish teaching of this story than Christian, actually. And it would have been an affront to the Pope, and especially with the way he's positioned nude, so close to her, and so forth. There was your brief PG-13 sexual reference, okay? But don't leave. I might have another. All right, yeah, I don't want to give that up. So, look what happens. Look at Eve, especially. Look at him, too. Actually, it works for him, too. Look at their faces, and then look at them when they leave. Their character was transformed and made worse because they sinned, and their physical appearances now become uglier and such. So Michelangelo was tapping into physiognomy to give you visual clues that here they are innocent based on physiognomy, here they are now fallen. And look at that face. Very different, but it's because her character changed, so her appearance changed. And then, of course, he continued to have fun with the church, with the Last Judgment. Originally, they were all naked. They were all nude. The Pope had to bring in other artists later to paint clothing on them. Okay, so if you had seen this originally, you would have seen, yes, that cloth would have been gone from Jesus and everyone else. They were all nude. And so when Biagio da Cesena, who was basically like the master of ceremonies, the secretary of state kind of deal for the Pope at the time, when he saw this, in earshot of Michelangelo, he said that the fresco was a, quote, orgy of pagan obscenities and heresies. Do not ever put down an artist when they are still creating art, because that is Biagio. He put him in hell in the Last Judgment, wrapped with a serpent, physiognomy, ugly. Look at this person staring at him. And that became the final. He got himself memorialized in this painting. Don't criticize an artist until they're done. Okay? That's the lesson from that, I think. Now, as for Jesus, that's not a typical image of Jesus that you're used to. This is like a really built-up Jesus. And so Michelangelo, he did use ancient sculpture to inspire him. Look at the face. That's Apollo. He used the face of Apollo for Jesus. And who do we want to bet he used for the body? Who would be an ancient figure that would fit a body like that? Hercules or Heracles. Yeah, so this was Michelangelo's favorite sculpture. Even when his older age and he was going blind, he would have his assistants bring him to him, and so he could feel the sculpture. So he combined two mythological, pagan entities to create Jesus. So, there was something pagan in this depiction. Now, this one's a fun one with physiognomy with Hieronymus Bosch. Christ carrying the cross. Within this scene, he has individuals with different maladies and such. Teeth out of order means a man of no worth who babbles and is arrogant. Deep-set eyes, a malicious, cruel liar. Large, bulging eyes, lecherous, lustful in nature. Fat cheeks, foolish and rude. He uses physiognomy around a perfectly depicted Christ who is absent of any of these issues through physiognomy. But through physiognomy, Bosch surrounds Christ with the 7 deadly sins. And you would know that by reading their faces. And he's marching through sin to die for man's sin. And the only other person on here who looks like without these is Veronica, Saint Veronica, who comes to us through Catholic tradition. She is not found in the Bible, but Catholic tradition indicates Veronica there that she wiped the face of Jesus with her veil as he walked by, resulting in a permanent imprint of his face on the cloth. Not the imprint that you read about where his in the tomb and his image allegedly is on the wrapping. This was a cloth she used, and his face, you can see it there, that Bosch includes. Another one to share real quick with physiognomy. I mean, look at this. This is Saint Sebastian, tended by Saint Irene. Saint Sebastian was executed by the Romans. He was shot with arrows, and he lived. He survived. So it's a miracle. Saint Irene came along, and she tended and nursed him back to health. They both end up getting martyred in the end, but this is when she's working with him. The way the light is on him, his eyes, physiognomy would indicate clearly these are saints. Here are other depictions of the way artists have treated Saint Sebastian. And because of all of the arrow wounds, Saint Sebastian was the patron saint of sickness and the plague. And so he was the saint you prayed to if the plague came to your town or village. And in fact, mothers and fathers would name little boys Sebastian to try to protect them. And it's because the arrow wounds looked like bubonic plague sores and such. And so they tied him. And this goes back to ancient period, the belief that death was above us, taking aim and shooting us all down equally. It's even found in the Iliad when Apollo is upset and starts the whole anger of Achilles by taking his chariot across the sky and shooting down at the soldiers. And that's forcing, of course, Achilles to be addressed, about, first Agamemnon to give back the daughter of the priest of his temple, of Apollo's temple. And then Agamemnon takes Achilles' booty, girl, and that gets the whole Iliad going. It's interesting that, of course, they had no understanding of disease or germs at this time. This is a medieval doctor. They would dress in this way to try to protect themselves from disease. The eye sockets would be so they couldn't look at you straight on because they thought if you looked at a plague victim, you would get it. So you had to look peripheral. In the snoot, they would fill with flowers because they believed it was the bad smell of a plague victim that made you sick. If you ever were a kid, and well, I know you were at one point, but if you did, ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, that's all the plague. Ring around a rosy, you got a red ring when it started. Pocket full of posies, the flowers to try to protect yourself from it, and so forth. So again, interesting digression on that, but physiognomy shows us he's again a saint. Disney milks physiognomy to death, okay? Disney is all about using physiognomy for its princes and its princes. And you can just scan quickly and look at how they have different looks, but similar traits. Wide eyes. We like wide eyes. And we got into that with the selfies, if you remember. But then Disney did this. I take my little girl, who's now 21, to see Frozen, and this guy enters the scene, and it's like, oh, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He looked good. He's handsome. He's got big round eyes. Okay? He is a villain. Okay? He's a bad guy. And it got me. Disney tricked me. Because this guy, it turns out, is really the villain in Frozen. And so I discussed this with ChatGPT because I get lonely sometime when I'm traveling. And so I have great conversations with ChatGPT. And I asked it, I said, hey, talk to me a little bit about Hans and this whole thing. We got into the discussion. And then it gave me this chart, which did it on its own. It was very, very, very nice, generous on its part. And it talks about how Hans in the Frozen, the first half, how the physiognomy worked with Hans. And then after it's revealed he's a bad guy, all of a sudden his physical features change. It's just like Michelangelo and Eve, after the fall. And so, again, do we have in Frozen, a Machiavellian character and such, and possibly we do. So, Machiavelli, what's the deal? Influence of Giambattista della Porta. Della Porta is he writes a whole host of works, contemporary of Santi di Tito. They both are living after Machiavelli has died. This is a posthumous portrait of Machiavelli. Santi di Tito was born basically the year Machiavelli died, or right around. So he never met Machiavelli. He never saw him. And so could physiognomy have directly influenced Santi di Tito as he painted this portrait? So Giambattista della Porta gave us a work in the late 1500s, 1580s on physiognomy, and it has drawing after drawing of different animals and so forth. If you're a hunting dog, if you look like this, you're tyrant or tyrannical in nature. If you look like a lion, you are horrible haughtiness, proud, snobbish, arrogant, but also seductive. If you look like a boar, you're slow of mind, lacking in intelligence. If you look like an ostrich, heaven help you, but if you do, you are prone to being irrational. If you look like a cat, this is where the dog lovers get happy. If you look like a cat, you're inclined to steal and to lie in wait. You are crafty and stealthy. And if you look like a monkey, you're very much wicked. And so I ask you, did you see anybody looking like Machiavelli? Any animals?
I'd say the monkey.
The monkey, and to some extent the cat. And there are composites of what a person would look like that looks like a cat, what a person would look like a monkey. And you see in the lips and so forth, and the hairline almost looks like the cat ears. Is he using this as a guide for the physiognomic cues to foist onto Machiavelli to say something about his character? Machiavelli was definitely at this point in history seen as evil. It came about pretty much right after he died. In fact, a little bit while he was alive, because of the prince. He was referenced as the Prince of Darkness. In Britain, they will call the devil Old Nick. It is believed it's referencing Niccolo Machiavelli for the devil. He's known as the devil's apostle. The Machiavel becomes a character in Elizabethan plays, and it is a crafty character. So why would they have a problem with Machiavelli in this nature? We can go into that in a long time here, but to cut to the chase, Machiavelli references Moses. Remember Leo Strauss's observation about Moses. He does reference Moses directly 4 times in The Prince. Chapter 6 and chapters 26. He talks about Moses as an outstanding ruler, Moses as an armed prophet. For goodness sakes, he had the power of God behind him, so he was an armed prophet. He talks about the plight of Italian people is similar to the plight of the Hebrew people. And he talks and tells Lorenzo to emulate great men such as Moses. And so I sat down with chapter 26 and Exodus. Chapter 26, which is the last chapter, calls for Italian unification. In The Prince, Machiavelli clearly states Italy had to suffer. Exodus 2:23, Hebrews had to suffer. Machiavelli has witnessed the suffering, paragraph 2. God knows of Hebrew suffering. Need for Savior to take Italians to their promised land, a united Italy. Need for a Savior in Exodus. Machiavelli names Lorenzo as Savior. God names Moses as Savior. God is with Lorenzo, he states. God will be with you. God is with Moses. God indicates he's with Moses. Machiavelli tells Lorenzo how to lead Italians to the promised land. He mentions miracles, including manna, in paragraph 3. New military formation. These are not supernatural miracles, but human-controlled miracles in the form of the prince. And then God, in Exodus, tells Moses how to lead the Hebrews to the promised land. Mentions manna, and then does a series of supernatural miracles. And then finally, he indicates Lorenzo will be well received. And in Exodus, God indicates that Moses was well received. It's an interesting structural similarity. Now, folks, if that's the case, who's Moses in this equation? It's Lorenzo. So where does that leave us with Machiavelli? Who's Machiavelli? He's God, in a sense. He's taking on the position of God. The prince becomes Lorenzo's burning bush. Interpreted in this way, this is the burning bush that gives the message to Lorenzo, the Moses of the people. And it is clear that Machiavelli sees that it is Lorenzo's destiny to lead the Italian people to their promised land. And after all, if we remember, as Callimaco concludes in The Mandrake, upon reflecting on his ploy to seduce Lucretia, who's married, all one has to fear from following one's destiny is going to hell. And how bad is that with so many excellent men already there? So, when you look at The Prince as a last point, and where Eric Voegelin has explored this from this perspective of Gnosticism, political Gnosticism, where Plato will give us 5 different types of souls, ranging from purely good aristocratic soul down to the horrible soul of a tyrant. He doesn't tell us what our nature is. He just says it's somewhere on that spectrum, and you need the courage to be a philosopher king, basically, and then you're going to get killed, but that's a whole other issue. But nonetheless, with Machiavelli, he's saying man is bad. He is claiming to know knowledge about human nature that only God would know in this case. And so he even, and this is a very telling statement he puts in chapter 12 of The Prince, he notes, in talking about the occupation of Italy by foreign forces and all of this, he says, "And he who said that our sins were responsible spoke the truth. However, they were not the sins that he meant. Mortal sins, sins against God. He says, but those that I have specified, and because they were the sins of rulers, they too have been punished for them. The sin is not following his teachings. So a different way maybe to think about it. I'm now really nervous because there's a philosophy professor in the room. But another way of looking at Machiavelli and at least seeing possibly some interesting connections with Exodus in chapter 26, and then looking at a portrait and trying to read it from a physiognomic perspective. So I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll come back next month. I really do, because that one is one that's very near and dear to my heart, and the secret that I uncovered in relation to a 19th century portrait. It'll definitely bring a tear to your eye too. All right. So thank you. Do you have any questions? Anything?